Hello and welcome to the DoneJS contributors meeting. Today is Friday, March 3rd, 2017, and with me today we're joined by Julian. Hello, Kevin or Justin.
Have you found your hipster barber?
No, I'm still in search, as you can tell by my haircut today. Kevin.
Which Kevin?
Both Kevins.
Both Kevins.
I'm back.
Hello.
Original Kevin back.
And Matthew.
Hello.
And I'm Chasen. We're going to go through our status for this past week and then what we'll be working on next week. Let's go in reverse order today. So Matthew, you want to go first?
Got me. Yes, with Kevin and Justin, we kind of talked about 1.0 and decided we'd try to get Electron support out before 1.0 because it's been a big requested feature, and it'd be nice for us to be able to say, hey, we do have something new and cool for 1.0. So been working on Electron support. It's mostly done. I've actually just submitted like the last code related issue, the last non-docs issue right before this. Of course, save docs for last. So yeah, so that's almost done. So we'll be releasing 1.0 next week, most likely. So that's where I am.
Sweet. Kevin.
Which Kevin? This Kevin?
Let's go for Phillips first, just
Okay.
be in reverse alphabetical.
Yeah, so I've been working with Matthew on DoneJS Electron. It's exciting to see that working. And then other than that, just a few small things, some last-minute file structure changes for generators and fixing publishing scripts and stuff like that. And then the only other thing, I helped out with some CAN repo updates to get all of our CAN repos on Steel 1.0. So yeah, next week, DoneJS 1.0. It's exciting.
Sweet.
Woo.
Kevin, go ahead.
All right, so I've been spending a bunch of time working on SYN stuff, especially, which will propagate up to func unit. So pointer and touch events are now on for all interaction types, with the sole exception of right click. I'm still working on that one. Everything else should be sending them at this point, and there are tests for all of those. I also contributed the modifiers key fix. So this was for hooking up meta and alt, and there was a bug in control. So those should all be working, and there are tests for them. I also spent a bunch of time working on the backspace and IE problem. So under certain circumstances, you end up sending two backspaces when you only meant to. You end up sending two key events for backspace when you only meant to send one. And that has not been contributed yet, but I'm hoping to contribute it today. And then I have a list of other stuff that I want to do. So this upcoming week, I'm going to start looking at doing the HTML5 drag drop. So right now, the drag drop solution that's in SYN, it works very well with jQuery drag drop, but it doesn't work with HTML5 or Dojo drag drop, which is what we use at MathWorks. So making one drag drop that works for everything is sort of the end goal there. And I also want to talk to you guys a little bit about maybe setting up some kind of like an action builder or something like that for things like on mobile devices, you have, instead of a right click, because you don't really have a right click, they do stuff like click and hold. There isn't really a good way to do that that will send the right events right now. And also, we need to start eventually talking about having some kind of maybe side library that will allow us to do stuff like multiple pointers, because when you're doing stuff like pinch to zoom and stuff, there's no way to really describe that right now in the current SYN API. So that's some of the stuff that I'm going to be looking at coming up. And of course, everybody here, I'll keep you guys in the loop. But yeah.
Yeah. Awesome.
Sounds awesome.
Yeah. You're improving SYN so much. It's awesome. Do you have, are there any GitHub issues open for, do you want to talk about any of those topics today?
If we have time.
Yeah, if there's a link to any GitHub issues, then I would drop it in the forum post. Otherwise, just like add a comment, and we should be able to get to them.
Okay.
Sweet. Okay, Justin.
So I've been mostly a waste of space this week in terms of actual contributions towards open source. The only thing I did was I made some very minor improvements to can set and can map. And I have no idea what I'm going to be able to actually do next week. Hopefully some blog articles I've been meaning to write for a long time. So that's it for me.
That sounds good. Julian.
Yeah, so last week I play hooky. So the word I get taught by you guys. So yeah, I'm very busy today or next week. So I have nothing to contribute this week or next week. Maybe if I have a free time next 2 weeks, I will spend a little bit on yeah, the old issues on CanStash. So I would like to make a pre-release for CanStash. So maybe I have time to make that working. But yeah.
Cool. And I'll go last. Last Friday, I published the We Heart Open Source Contributors blog post and got out a release of FunkUnit. And then this week has been a mix of fixing a few issues here and there. It's the new month, so writing up the metric report. And then today, I plan on publishing the community update blog post. And we have someone new to Batobi who joined the team. His name is Robert. And this week been getting him up to speed with helping on a bunch of like developer relations and doc fixes and fixing all of the things that kind of just get dropped on the table in other day-to-day development. So he might join us at the end of this live stream. So next week, gonna continue with the same theme of him working on fixing the various small things, and then I'm hoping to focus a little bit more on getting some meetups out the door and conferences, more applications out the door, and doing more like a blog post and writing development and relationship building in the rest of the community. That's what I'll be working on. Cool. Does anyone have anything that they want to discuss before we move to the topics in the forum? Awesome. All right. I posted first. I just have one smaller issue. Let me share my screen. Cool. So I found this issue because we're wrapping up the DoneJS 1.0 release, and it's always bugged me that the DoneJS generator puts components just into the source folder, and then we put models into a separate models folder. And at least every project that I've worked on, it's been way easier to organize things if we have a components folder that has all of the components. And then there's probably some additional bike shedding to do related to how we generate supermodels. So I wanted to bring this up as a topic for conversation if anyone has opinions about how we generate supermodels and where we put components and that sort of thing. Anyone have opinions?
Well, I think the first thing to actually decide is, does this represent a breaking change? If we were to change this in like a DoneJS 1.1, would that not represent a breaking change? Because my opinion is, if that doesn't represent a breaking change, we should not do this now. We should do it later. we're too close to like a 1.0 release. And I would just rather do this as part of a 1.1. If we do think it's going to represent a breaking change, then we really need to discuss it.
Yeah.
I don't think it's a breaking change. I think if we started generating components in a components folder, you could run that generator on a 1.0 app and everything would still work.
So I guess we can talk about it. Then I would say like my preference is let's do it as part of a 1.1, not delay 1.0 for something like that.
Okay, I guess if making those changes doesn't, like if you'll be able to use the same 1.0 or 1.1 generators with a 1.0 generated or 1.1 generated app, then I guess it's not a breaking change. I'm not.
That's my opinion. Yeah, that's
okay.
Yeah, my point of view is I think I'm not talking about that stuff, but whether we make the change or not, I think there should be more feedback. There just hasn't been. It's only been 4 days, so it hasn't been very long for people to provide feedback. But this is the sort of thing that people have like super strong opinions about, is where they put files and whatnot. Personally, I don't use generators, so I don't care so much. But a lot of people have very strong opinions about this. They would like to talk about it. They haven't commented on your issue yet, so I think we need to get this in front of more people to comment on, to get some feedback there.
The other comment that I have is it possible for us to make this configurable so that, Jason, you can do what you want and we can by default get what we want, or get how it works now?
We've always tried to make it easy to make generators. Has been the idea there. Is like if it's easy to make a generator, then there can be 1,000 different preferences for folder structure and whatnot.
Yeah, but even if we could modify the generator that exists.
So both Bitballs and Bitcentive both have a components folder. So I think it's pretty natural to have a components folder. You can still do that. I mean, I think that we should just be uniform in how those work. Like an alternative is you could just say, hey, the model generator should require the person to write models / recipes or something like that when they're writing out the path name, just like you do with components. I think there's a strong argument to be made that those should be consistent. So I think it's fine to do it in a components folder. I agree with that. And we should, as part of this, figure out whether we want models to be also be modlets. I've never felt the need, because it's rare that there's demo pages for them. The test there's just like, there should be a test, but then it's just right next to it. It never felt like you need the folder structure, a full modlet for models, but other people disagree with me. I don't know. That's my feeling, but consistency matters. So I understand the argument for putting models in their own folder.
So maybe these two issues are things that we can just collect more feedback and then maybe address in a 1.1 or future release of DoneJS. Does that seem like a reasonable thing to move forward on?
I'll prod some people at Bateau, because I know there's some people that will talk about it, talk your head off about it on Slack, but then they haven't been commenting on the issue. So
okay,
there's a couple of people in mind that I'll ping on.
Okay, sounds good. Cool. Then we'll move on to, I think Justin posted next and had topics. Is that correct?
Yeah. So just some performance things that I was looking at and how to improve like our live binding performance. Just talking through them just because it's fun ideas anyways. First one is to rewrite. So Stash and a lot of our code has to operate in, a lot of times there's different, you feature detect something, but what we need to be able to do from a testing perspective is simulate the different. Sometimes we need to simulate what is being feature detected. Oh, are we running on a virtual DOM? A virtual DOM doesn't have mutation observers, or are we running not with a virtual DOM? So our code a lot of times has to check those things dynamically every time. For instance, you want to replace one element with another element. Well, we have to call this method here, and then obviously you're calling this outer method too. So there's kind of two method calls that don't really have to exist for the most common case. One thing that we could do to improve this is we could effectively we could make it so when those things that can change, like the document, or whether there's mutation observers or anything that we're kind of feature detecting, we essentially set up bindings on feature detecting, what we're feature detecting. So if that changes, we rewrite the code. So for instance, like our mutations, what you kind of have to call in CanJS whenever you mutate an element. This is mostly, you only have to do this if you're writing code that you want to work in a virtual DOM. But it's good to call those methods anyways. We could make make the mutate object, the API for things that there is a mutation observer, and then it's very simple, straightforward code. And then we could have another one for when it's not for when there isn't a mutation observer. And then we could kind of set up our own we don't have to use can event for this. We could have a very kind of lame version of observability where you just put in your callback for whenever mutation observer changes. We would just make our mutation observer call those methods, and you have to unregister yourself, like in a manually by splicing yourself from this list if you ever wanted to actually unbind yourself, which I don't really think there's a case where you'd want that. Perhaps maybe if we were worried about live reload with this code, but unlikely something is changing underneath this to actually rerun this code. But this is one way that we could improve, I think, the performance of our code, remove a lot of
Justin,
extra function calls.
Yeah, so the problem is extra function calls, right? Can you show that code, the function call part again?
The function call part, the top part, you mean?
Yeah. This is the problematic, right? Is that we're calling this get mutation observer function.
We're calling this function, and then we're calling this function just when all we really need to do is this.
So if that was on types or something, would that work as well? Like if there was a types.mutation observer, and that's the thing that got mutated?
If there were,
can types.
Yeah, I know can types.
Yeah, so if there was a types.mutation observer, and every time mutation observer changed, that's the thing that changed. So you wouldn't have to call a get mutation observer function. You would just check types.mutation observer.
Sure, that would eliminate one function call, but it's not going to eliminate this outer function call. So it would make it better but there'd still be a branch and a check. There's still like this code.
Okay, so in this case,
and branches in some ways are as expensive as.
Yeah, in this case, replace child is just an alias for element prototype replace child. Yeah. Most of the time. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. So in this case, that might be the better.
So even if you did what we made it just a check, there's a property read, a branch.
No, I get it. Yeah,
and a function call we'd all be removing because it would just be literally calling replace child.
Yeah, in this case that's true. I'm wondering, there's a million places where we get the document and that kind of thing.
There are.
So not all of those necessarily.
It's a little bit different because the document, we're not feature detecting. You need to get the document one way or another. Yes, there's a function call, but it's not like it's how do I say this? It's a function call that's giving you the value, but it's not I don't know. It's a little bit.
There's no branch, branching.
Yeah, it's a little bit different.
Yeah,
It's
I
one of these
wonder-
branching that's the problem with the extra function call.
Because there is a cost to like dot properties. Because I've looked at the code for browsers, and there there's like object descriptors and all that kind of thing. So there is a cost to properties lookups. Wonder what that compares to like what we're doing for function for a document. I don't know.
Yeah, I'm not. I guess I'm not really as worried about these ones actually. It's more this mutation observer ones that I noticed that there's a performance issue with. That could be just eliminated. The next is, I think I linked to this blog article. One thing that we can do is change our diff to do, so we do like a left to right diff, but you can also come at it from the right-hand side for a linear diff. Basically what it means, like if you had something like this, our diff is eventually going to, if you had A, B, C, D, E, F, G going to A, B, F, D, C, G, our diff is essentially going to remove all of these elements and replace it with these elements, because we only go from left to right. But there's another way you can do it where you go from left to right, and then you also try to go from right to left. So this would essentially be able to like stop it, like not have to do G, essentially. And there's a little bit more where it can like kind of four-way compare all of the things at the end and be able to do swaps as well. And this is basically like React's full smarter diff. We should start doing that. It basically means that if things are the same at the beginning and at the end, you're going to account for that. So it's a little bit smarter than our diff.
So when you say our diff, you're talking about like canutil diff?
Yeah. Yeah.
That's used by what?
That's
like
used by
our list,
by everything.
Like
yeah,
everything.
By everything that does diffing, it's used by that, or everything uses that.
And the big thing would be like CanView Live, right? Where what other diffing? Oh, I guess a lot for Can Connect probably.
Can Connect now does a lot of diffing too. So
yeah. Okay.
Another thing. One other thing that I've thought about for a long time, but just never did, which was we don't have, so we use computes everywhere, like inside can stash. We're always like we're making this evaluator function and we're converting it to compute. This really could be now this is expensive because not only does it have to create, we have the actual compute functions actually create a version of a prototype compute. So it's really like we're almost creating kind of like a compute within a compute here. And then of course at the end of it, there's just an observation. So it's like there's these three layers between like, observation is the lowest layer, and then we create like a compute prototype around that, and then we create our kind of higher kind of user form of compute around that. There's no real reason to do all of that extra work here, especially because like this form of compute is almost never used by a user. This is a special form of compute that's not observable, and observations themselves are not observable. In a lot of ways, like we wrote can observation first when I was writing making EJS observable, and then I put in this behavior inside computes where I could have just like made a can observation and made this whole system work off can observation. So this would be a reasonable improvement because there's just a lot of functions that are like the most expensive functions that just aren't needed. I actually had the arrow wrong here. It meant these first two. So this would just alone, there's like a little bit more than 5% here, a little bit less than 5% here. Combined, it should like shave off about 10% because just none of this is needed. Should be a nice little improvement. Next thing is event delegation. I just want to experiment with that. Like it's possible that we can, instead of actually setting up any bindings, we just add like the scope to the DOM data, and then when an event happens, we walk up, we find something with DOM data, and then we can run those event handlers at that point. The nice thing about this is we can probably get away with, we could also avoid listening on the attributes event. Right now we listen to the attributes event to know if like the attribute has been removed or not. So we can kind of dynamically know whether we should be binding or not. This would make it so we don't have to do that. Essentially, we'd walk up the element of the event tree or the DOM tree and look for attributes that essentially match, whether we actually have like a click or something like that on the element, and then we do the processing. It would mean that like responding to a click is much slower, but does that matter compared to rendering, the initial rendering performance? I'd argue no. Click is a one-time cost.
What's much slower?
I would say probably like
10 seconds per click.
I would say like 10 times slower, but again, you're talking about like maybe 100 milliseconds instead of 1 millisecond, but 10 milliseconds instead of 1 millisecond. But you might be, if you're rendering like 100 rows, there is no event binding setup. There's just like you're adding DOM data, so that is much faster.
So I think 10 milliseconds instead of 1 millisecond is totally fine, but 100 milliseconds instead of 10 would be pretty noticeable, I think.
It would be. So I think we're going to have to see. I don't think it'll be that long.
Okay.
Almost impossible that it's that long. Like I think it'll still be really fast. I mean, it's an experiment. I think in the end, it's going to improve most apps' performance. The place where you wouldn't want to use this is like maybe mouse, like drag drop kind of things. But what we could do is, we could make it so that, some events are and some events don't use this, depending on like the performance characteristics and needs. Okay, so that was it for some performance things. And I kind of do want to start moving people onto working on these things post 2.0, or post CanJS 3.5 and post DoneJS 1.0. A lot of this needs to start, though, with, as we talked about, the can symbol and can, what is it, operate. That's really the basis of everything going forward. Anyways, DoneJS 2.0, things that we want. We had a talk a little bit this week, or maybe last week, on things that we were thinking for DoneJS 2.0. Kind of maybe from top to bottom. So I need to fill out this issue so people can understand it besides me and the people who talked about it. So the first one is streaming server-side rendering. This is something that we actually worked on a little bit last weekend at Hack Illinois. Made a decent amount of initial progress, but basically, so this will have a huge performance impact on anything doing server-side rendering, because essentially you can serve up the head elements in an HTML response so that you can start loading the client can start loading style tags right away while you're waiting for the data or any synchronous data on the server-side rendering part. So it could improve performance considerably. The next thing is we want to satisfy Google's progressive web app feature list, so that we can say like DoneJS apps are, what they would consider progressive web apps and have those kind of features. We want to improve can connect and can set so they're a little bit easier to use.
Sorry to interrupt. Before we move on from the PWA stuff, I think when we had talked about it last, we were thinking of doing like a DoneJS add PWA or something like that. Are you suggesting that we bake it in when you create a app, or do the same sort of style where it's something you can add?
I mean, I don't know. It depends. Like,
I don't think it's, yeah.
It depends on how far we are from, and like what features are totally needed. If all that's needed is like your your web manifest or whatever they're called, and that's all that's needed, then we might just generate that as part of.
Yeah, at least you need a service worker at least.
Yeah, you need a service worker.
Yeah, service worker. Yeah. So
I don't think any of these issues are like we've even talked about what it would entail, right?
yeah, that's very true. We don't know what the final form of this would be. It's more just like what we think is important to users and what they'd respond to.
Mm-hmm.
The next is can connect and can set, just making those easier to use. I do feel like at minimum, can connect needs. I think there's two big improvements. The first is it should support some kind of interface descriptions so that like a behavior knows what it depends on and will complain at you if you don't provide it when it needs. The next thing is I think there needs to be a way to insert a behavior in between other behaviors. That's something that's possible but potentially has bad performance implications, although they might not matter because we'd be rewriting the prototype chain, but that might not matter. I think those two things will allow us to, so people can compose their own can connect behavior functions, and two, mostly that's actually it. It's like it'll make it so people can kind of build them themselves with functions. Matthew, we did talk about making them so they're class-based, which I like as well. But I think an interface description would help a lot to say like, oh, real-time depends on having a created instance method. And you don't have a created instance method because you forgot to include the constructor behavior. And then I also like the ability to say like, hey, I've got a combination of like, behaviors that will weave themselves into an existing can connection, because they can kind of like insert in the middle and things like that. For can set, I think we make it so that there's a standard API you call like get list with, and it gets translated into whatever your server expects, and you write that translation. And this will make, I think, creating custom set algebras far easier to understand. I should link. We need a new template engine, or just like improve templating experience in some way. We want to make it so you can use decorators on ES classes. So that would mean like when you're building components or your observables or your view models or anything like that, you're just using ES classes and you're decorating observability or whatever else into them. We want it so you can generate with like either using CommonJS or ES6, Mocha or QNIF for testing, tabs versus spaces. This is the symbols and operators stuff. This is low-level stuff that I kind of just talked about in the last issue, but don't worry about it. That's internal stuff that actually users wouldn't probably see. We want better routing to handle 404s and things like that more easily. It's kind of difficult to set up, more difficult than it should be. We already have internationalization and polyfill set up, but I think we need to highlight that better. And this is also like some performance stuff. We've got the dev cache that Manuel is finishing up, and we want a smaller production loader so that, if you don't need all of the features, the dynamic features of Steel in production, you don't have to load all of Steel. Anything else there that people think would be?
Is there a plan for having a Chrome extension? So I saw maybe half a year ago that Alexis is working or was working on a Chrome extension for
CanJS.
For CanJS.
Yeah,
I don't know if that's been upgraded to 3.0 yet or not.
I don't think it has. They were working on it a little bit.
I don't know. Is it working anyways? So I didn't get it working yet. So I tried to install it on Chrome, but
yeah, I don't think they completely finished it. So,
but I think that would be nice for DoneJS release 2.0. to have a Chrome extension to see your file, your template live bindings or all the stuff.
Mm-hmm.
You could like click on the component and it would show you the view model or something like that.
Yeah.
I kind of feel like, I don't know, we have all this stuff, which I don't know if all this stuff is going to be in a DoneJS 2.0, but I think it is a good idea just to throw everything, like what are the stuff that we're thinking about. So like one thing I've been thinking about is styles, and I submitted a proposal a couple weeks ago about a styles project that I'm interested in doing.
So is can set, is there already something done that it's easier to understand or write your own set algebra, or is it only in
my mind?
Only in your mind, okay.
Yeah, the basic idea is that we would, every time you're doing like a get list, everybody, no matter what your server looks like, you have to call it in a particular way. You know, where name is Julian, and you can say sort is a particular way, and limit, offset.
Yeah, there was a filter, I think in the form there was a filter feature request to filter less than or greater than and something like that.
Yeah, so basically what the general idea is that we will have a standard API for GetList. Like this has to look like this, no matter what your server is. And when you create your algebra, what you're actually going to do is write a translation for that. So the set is going to come in and it's going to produce the params for the server. So you would, like, let's say your server expected, instead of like the query string looking like where name Julian, instead of that, it wanted everything flat. So the real request would be like name equals Julian, and you had like you had pages or something. Limit is 10, offset is 2. Yeah, let's just say that's page 2. And you had like whatever. You wanted that. There was no sort. Okay, so what you need to do is translate this to, and we'll provide functions that can do the translation because we already had those anyways, to help you convert this to an object that you would want. But you would need to take that set and return name Julian. Basically the params that need to be sent to the server page 2, given this data here. And to me, this is like far, far easier, I think, to understand than creating your own custom, like, you know, property, set property definitions. Like, oh, page really is a, you know, limit offset type thing. Very much trickier to get right.
What do you did with a filter method? How you can filter less or greater than? That's not implemented right now.
Yeah,
so
basically we're going to have to implement all of those. So like there'll have to be something like, so I think what we're going to do, I don't think I mean, my opinion is the core problem is more problem with getting people how to actually create their algebras, given things that already exist, like helpers like limit and offset and stuff like that, how to say, hey, this property, I'm ignoring one property, or this property should behave like this. To create something like a greater than less than, to weave that into the set logic, I think that's still going to be relatively more difficult. But that's not the case that I'm optimizing for. Like, we will have plugins that allow you to do like age greater than 22. And then the thing is if this was the standard, then people need to translate that into whatever their server expects. But I think it's just easier to teach people, create this always, translate it for your particular service layer, than what happens right now, which is basically making them translate their service layer into what CanSet expects.
You still need to write this up in an issue, right? You said this was just in your head.
I think there's an issue around this, but I didn't link to it. But
Okay.
yeah, I'll write it up in an issue if it's
Cool.
not there already. I think I made it a while ago. Anyways, does that make sense, Julian?
Yeah, but I don't understand if you have age greater than 22. So that will translate it to a query to your server, and you get back and list that's filtered or is sorted by the server. But how is it filtered in your stash list that is outputted? So I think CanSet will throw the list into this template and will sort it for you, right? But how you can do it with that age greater than 22, because there is no filter that is merging our response to the stash template.
I'm not. Are you talking about the use case where I'm not actually sure what you're saying?
No. So you're talking about translating the get filter object to a query to pass to the server, right?
Mm-hmm.
So the server get back a list. There's a list that is filtered, for example, for the age greater than 22, and you get back from the server a filtered list for that particular age.
Yeah.
So, but how is it working with Can Connect and CanSet? Because I thought Can Connect will merge that list to the rendered list on CanStash, right?
What do you mean by merge?
Yeah, Can Connect will merge the get list if you
You're talking about which behavior are you talking about?
Yeah, if you have a list in CanStash, and you will add a list and you will add an item to the list, then you save that item and you have
yes. So you're talking about the real time behavior.
Yes.
So like that you can call create instance, and you could pass it something like, name, or you have to be Julian, age. How old are you?
31.
31. I didn't know. I just want to make sure you were older than 22, because otherwise you wouldn't be in the list. So okay, there's this would be inserted into the list. Yeah. So the server pushed this out because it would know how to do this comparison, see that this does belong in, it does belong in here. By the way, the real time just ignores, it assumes that like if it got Julian 31 but he should have been on page like 22, too bad, we're still going to show everything that's inserted. The real time just ignores limit and offset.
So you mean we don't need a filter set algebra, right? Because all filtering is done by the server.
No.
No.
No, this is still filtering. This whole where determines the filtering. So if you got, if you did
where's
this,
a filter that has the function greater or less than?
this would be built into the algebra's capabilities. This would be part of the like standard, like this is a set, this would become a standard type, like a set description or set descriptor that would.
But today there's no greater than.
You're filter, right, there is none. And that's what I'm saying. We would build that and add that.
Okay, that's, now I understand, yeah, okay.
I guess what I'm saying, like the set description, like there's still going to be have to be some mechanism to say like, well, I have a custom where behavior. I want where ors to work or something, right? Maybe someone needs to be able to do something like this, where it's like, okay, these are ors or something, right? Because eventually, like if you want to support or, but then there's going to always be a lot of work to make something like a greater than work. And I think what I'm saying is that we're just that's never gonna be easy, because the logic for a greater than has to work with set algebra. So you have to know what is the inverse of greater than? Well, it's less than or equal, right? Like someone has to train our set algebras to be able to handle this situation. And that's not easy. And that's what we've been forcing that on users to do almost any kind of basic translation. And I guess what I've realized about CanSet is I'm separating those things. Like these kind of things, let's leave that to the core team or people who know what they're doing. And I don't think I think it might be a little bit easier actually, but I don't think it's going to get ever that much easier to build these kind of additional syntactical, or like, I don't know, different expression logic, ways of expressing logic within a set. That's not going to get easier. But what we are going to make easier, a lot easier for people, is how to make stuff like this work with their service layer, which I think it's very easy to just write like a simple translation function. Like, fine, your server doesn't support limit offset, it supports pages. Well, what you do is you divide this by this and add 1, and then you get your page number, and then you put that back, right? If you don't have where, it's called $where or something like that. You take that set, which would have where, and you add $ to it, or whatever you need to do. Your server doesn't call it GT, it calls it something else. And here you're either returning a string, which would be used as your query string, or you're returning like an object that goes through can params, basically. And I think that this is what almost everybody needs to do, and is really hard, but we've been making them go through the difficulty of this to get that. And I think that's what we're fixing. Hopefully that makes sense.
Okay, yeah.
Cool. All right. Anything else people wanted to talk about with 2.0?
Yeah, I think it's important for us to get Testy and DocumentJS to a 1.0 version. And for, like, I personally don't know what that would be for Testy. And then for DocumentJS, it seems like we need to figure out if we're gonna merge it with BitDocs so we can make a 1.0 release, or how that's going to work. But we have lots of applications that are using and depending on both of those, and it seems like for a DoneJS 2.0 release, we really should get all of our packages up to 1.0. That's it.
I agree.
Possibly, yeah. I mean, like I said, I think we should just throw all of our ideas in and then decide later what makes the cut. But DoneJS upgrade or DoneJS update or whatever. We talked about that for a while.
Yeah, that would be slick.
My hope is that DoneJS, like actually what we're kind of going for in 2.0, for the most part, wouldn't have any breaking changes. I would hope. I could see maybe DocumentJS, but like the actual core code is that you would be able to just write things differently, but those old modules should still be there. Like if we switch to something like can custom element, which again, Matthew, we got to change that name. It's just too wordy, huh?
We've never talked about changing the name.
Oh, I thought I mentioned that with you before.
No,
okay.
I created an issue about changing the name, and you didn't respond to it.
Maybe I saw that. Yeah, it needs a new name. It's just too mouthy, too wordy. But if we move to something like that for DoneJS 1.0, or 2.0, presumably all your components should still work.
Yeah, makes sense. A lot of those changes aren't necessarily going to result in breaking changes for existing apps.
Yeah.
So that's good. That's one of our that's our goal.
The whole point. Yeah.
Yeah.
Kevin, anything you want to see for Func Unit as part of this?
Well, I have sort of a list of stuff that people have asked me for, but I don't have it with me, so I can't really speak to it presently. Just basically some of the stuff that I talked about before, probably.
Touch, maybe.
Touch should already be in there. So, I mean, I think that when we're talking about touch, like a complete solution for touch, we really are talking about an external library, something that can be plugged into FunkUnit, because otherwise you're going to have all these APIs that most people aren't going to use, and it's just really bloating the package. So I think it would be better to have something that you can just sort of plug in and use that way. But
so for me personally, I've never been worried about bloating FunkUnit because it's only used in a test scenario, and who cares if it's like 200 kilobytes, because like it's not like slowing up your application.
Mm-hmm.
And it's only tends to be only needed to load once for the entire life cycle of your testing page. So if it's like takes a quarter second to load, but it's like for 1,000 tests, it's never bothered me.
Okay. Well, I think I was thinking of it more of a barrier to entry. Like, so you want, I mean, I think that one of the goals, or one of the really great things about FunkUnit is that it's really easy for people just to download and start using, right?
Mm-hmm.
But as soon as you start really bloating that API, it starts to become intimidating. And for certain types of interactions, that it only makes sense in the context of touch. So as far as I know, there are no computers with like 2 mouse cursors, right? So anything that uses multiple pointers generating multiple pointer events doesn't really make sense outside of the context of touch. So that's why I think that having that be a separate thing is sort of a good idea. Because then you're sort of opting into it, right? You're saying, hey, I'm going to do touch testing. So let me grab this package and incorporate it like some kind of mixin or something like that into FunkUnit.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. One thing that I would really like to see with FunkUnit that I've been planning on doing forever but never did was just get rid of this kind of stuff. Like the F function represents a actual element, and that's to me a big mistake. It should represent a selector. Okay. And every action, and this is something that like Alexis and I actually started on but never completed. That way you could just you could take something like this, which is just trying to click through all of the not checked elements. And I've always felt that that's really weird and like buggy for me, because I think you should be able to write it like this. This should represent a selector, and then you're just clicking that selector. So it's going to move to the next element. It's not going to like keep the element around. It's different than how jQuery works, but like you can even see this test. There's so many times where it's like trying to find something that's checked or not checked, and you have to rewrite. And also you can't save a selector. Like I've always wanted to be able to just do like, hey, to me it should represent a selector, not checked. I should be able to do something like this, and I should be able to reuse the heck out of that. Right? It's like easier to script that way in some way, I feel. And then I can do something else, like I have my input element and I do, type something. And then I can call not checked again. It represents a selector, not an element. Because sometimes it actually does represent a selector. I feel like, if I remember this correctly, there are cases where, like, if the element isn't present right away, then it does represent a selector. And then once it has an element, then the element takes over. There's some weird stuff going on in there. And that's one thing that, like, even this example demo would just be, like, this page, if this is what we're trying to show off to users, I think it would be improved by representing a selector, not an element.
Okay. So is that something that you'd be interested in us working on for the next major version of FunkUnit? Because obviously that would be a
definite breaking change. Yeah, I think that would be. I think that would be a lot. I think that'd be really nice. It's something I've always wanted to do. I just haven't had, someone like you to work with. So yeah, if you want to work on that, like I'd totally make some time for that.
Okay.
So you think it would be like a mobile plugin where you would add new methods onto FuncUnit?
Well, I'm really interested in creating something like an action builder. So for pointer events, when you're actually doing the pointer event constructor, you can specify a number for your pointer. So you can have n number of pointers doing different things to represent, fingers, pens, like styluses, all kinds of stuff. And I mean, even for the pointer event stylus APIs, and actually all of the pointer events are the same. It's just that they fill different attributes when they're being constructed. Like the stylus APIs actually take into account things like the angle of the pen. There's all kinds of nuance there. And so if you're doing something like trying to automate a drawing application, that is something that you're probably going to want to control, and we don't really have a way to control it right now. And just having something like an action builder, if it's something that Selenium has that I think is very useful. And if we could do something like that, but have all these additional things that you can do, like if you want to change the angle, if you want to change, or if you want to move like pointer 2 and 3 at the same time and going different ways and stuff like that, it's easy.
Yeah, it's like how kind of animations are constructed and then run.
Okay.
Sounds similar to that. Have you created?
I haven't really done anything with it. Oh, have I created an issue for this? No, I have not.
I guess I'd be curious to see what your the API you dream up looks like.
Okay. Sure, I can write something up on that. Yeah.
That would be cool.
Yeah, I think it'd be good to whatever ideas that you and the team has to create issues and have a good starting place for discussion.
Okay.
Cool. I think that's all the time that we have today, unless anyone had anything before we took off. All right, cool. Thank you, everyone who's watching the live stream. If you're watching on YouTube afterwards, thank you very much. Thanks for joining us today, and see you guys next week.
Bye.
Bye.
Thanks, Jason.